I am just a 1,000-year-old skeleton, forgotten by the world in another realm, and I've lost count of the ages I've weathered. And in that vast expanse of time, I somehow developed advanced intelligence. I alone manage the largest farm in this world. However, I have a peculiar habit: I only come out to farm at night. Year after year, the grain from the farm piles up like mountains. But I never eat a single grain. Farming has become the sole obsession of my existence. In addition, I'm also passionate about collecting the bones of various skeletons. Who could have known that a sudden change of events many years later would allow me, with the little food I'd stored, to transform into the savior revered by all of humankind? My name is Ange, and I'm the lowliest vegetable farmer in the Undead Empire. And I've been doing this for over 1,000 years. Besides me, there are 79 other skeletons just like me on the farm. Each of them is responsible for farming 100 mu of farmland. In their spare time, most of the others just idle about, burrowing into haystacks, or shooing away the little birds pecking at the crops. As a result, it doesn't take more than a dozen years for their bones to be bitten by pests and gradually decay, until they eventually lose the ability to move. Once the higher beings in the sky notice this, they soon send new skeletons to take over. But I'm completely different from them. I use straw to build a shelter to avoid the sun during the day, and I also regularly clean and maintain my own bones. Not only that, but whenever I see a skeleton that has decayed and lost its ability to move, I'll pick it up and take it home for my collection. When one of my own bones is about to wear out, I go through the skeletons I've collected, pick out a bone that's still in good condition, and attach it to myself. And just like that, using these methods, throughout these long years, I have tenaciously survived. Then, one winter, over 100 years later, waking from hibernation, I was astonished to discover the entire world had changed. Not only were the wails of the resentful spirits gone, but there was no sign of my companions for 100 li in any direction. Even the high-ranking undead beings who patrolled the sky were gone. This was the first time I felt that something wasn't right. No matter how hard I racked my brain, I couldn't figure out what it was. Looking at the desolate state of the entire farm, an idea suddenly struck me. Could it be that new skeletons have decayed? At this thought, I immediately and happily ran towards the surrounding abandoned areas. After searching through all the abandoned areas, I had collected a total of 79 skeletons. And so, relying only on those skeletons, I managed to last for another 30-some years. During that time, I continued to carry on with my farming duties. With every harvest, I would set aside some of the crop seeds. I stored the rest of the grain in a very large underground storeroom. Judging by the vast capacity of the storeroom, if I wanted to fill it all by myself, it would probably take another 1,000 years. After I used up the last of my spare skeletons, I was finally forced to leave this farm where I had stayed for over 7,500 years. On my way, I discovered that the once bustling undead empire was now as eerily silent as my farm. Soon, I unknowingly arrived at the Palace of Eternal Rest. This is the residence of the Lord of the Dead, the Undead King, the supreme being in the entire undead empire. Normally, someone of my humble status would never be allowed to set foot in this place. But, driven by my instinct to survive, I resolutely stepped inside. After searching the vicinity of the palace for several days, I couldn't find a single other being, let alone the Undead King. Luckily, I found a pile of skeletons that were still in good shape. And among them were several higher-level gray bone and white bone skeletons. For a low-level skeleton like me, this was no different than finding a pile of treasure. Next, I picked out a bunch of intact bone parts. Then, I pieced together a complete skeleton, and finally, transferred my soul into it. In a flash, I instantly transformed into a higher-level gray bone skeleton. Although, I would have preferred to assemble an even higher-level silver skeleton frame. But my soul was too weak. Even if I built one, I wouldn't be able to control it. But I was already very satisfied. In the time that followed, I returned to the farm and continued my work. Ever since becoming a gray bone skeleton, my work efficiency has multiplied. The tasks that used to take a whole day to finish, I can now complete in just 5 or 6 hours. In my spare time, I studied how to use the illusion magic of the Scarecrow Hat. The Scarecrow Hat is an item that can cast illusion magic. By just infusing a tiny bit of magic into it, you can maintain an illusion for a long time. Unless someone has a stronger mind than the caster, it's very difficult to see through the illusion. Of course, with such a simple illusion, I could only use it to scare the little birds on the farm. Up to this point, I've already learned several illusions that can change my appearance. Soon, more than 1,000 years passed. It was just like any other day. I was putting the crops in a small cart and then transporting them to the warehouse. As I was pushing it, I noticed something strange in the distance. I looked up and saw an archway glowing with white light. It had appeared outside the fence at the edge of the farm. Seeing this, I thought those immortal beings had returned. I immediately pushed the cart and hurried towards the archway. After arriving and circling it a few times, didn't find any immortal beings. Confused, I walked into the very center of the archway. The next second, a blinding light flashed before my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself in a completely new world. Two prominent stone pillars stood in a wasteland of gray earth, also emitting a faint white glow. Right after, the film of light on the pillars turned into a magic wristband, and then smoothly slipped onto my wrist. Just then, a weak voice came from behind me. A living person. I prayed to the undead souls. Why did a living person come instead? I immediately turned around to look. I saw a scrawny human lying on the ground, reaching out with a skeletal hand, pressing it against his own foot. After the man bitterly spoke his last word, his head and arm instantly fell limp, and he passed out. Hearing this, I was baffled. Living person? Is he talking about me? I'm clearly a skeleton. Why would this person call me a living person? Then, it suddenly dawned on me. I took off the scarecrow hat on my head. It turns out I had been maintaining my human illusion, which is why this man was mistaken. Next, I walked over and poked him. After observing him carefully, I realized this person's life force was fading. Before long, this human was going to be a goner. Since this was the first time I'd ever encountered a situation like this, I suddenly felt lost and helpless. Then, I had a flash of inspiration. I remembered I still had a cart full of freshly harvested crops. Humans need food, right? Seeing how skinny this person was, he must be starving. With that in mind, I couldn't worry about anything else. After turning over the human who had collapsed on the ground, I grabbed a handful of grain and stuffed it into his mouth, then squatted beside him to observe quietly. But after waiting for a long time, I realized the human showed no signs of eating. I was confused again. Why wasn't he eating? Then it dawned on me that humans can't eat when they are unconscious. Since that was the case, I decided to help him one more time. I immediately grabbed more grain and forced it into his mouth. Under my constant feeding, the human was finally roused by my efforts. The weak man struggled to spit out the grains that nearly choked him, explaining that grain must be husked and cooked to be eaten. He also said he would die of thirst if he didn't drink water soon. Hearing this, I was stumped once again. Where was I supposed to get water for him? I ended up pondering this for the entire day. Because of that, the man in front of me called for help many times, but I didn't even notice. In the end, this human, staring at a cart full of food, starved to death right there. The human was dead, and Anger realized he couldn't go back either. The light demon had turned into a magical leather sheath on his wrist, but as for how to turn the sheath back into the light demon, he had no idea. Regarding the fact that he couldn't return, Anger didn't give it much thought. This place wasn't so different from the Palace of Rest. It was just as deathly silent and desolate. The only difference was that there were other skeletons here. Not long after the human died, a withered skeleton wandered over from the distance. It swayed as it walked forward, its empty eye sockets fixed on the human's corpse. It was as if something on the corpse was attracting it, but when it came within about 3 meters, the withered skeleton suddenly stopped. It tilted its head in confusion and turned towards Anger. Its hollow eye sockets landed on Anger, and the soul fire within them flickered. The skeleton turned and wandered away in another direction at a much faster speed. Skeletons have ranks, and Anger's rank was much higher than this skeleton's. He had scared it off instantly, and so, Anger stayed right where he was. Throughout the afternoon, he scared away more than a dozen skeletons, both withered and white-boned. Then, as if they had all communicated and redrawn their territories, no more low-level skeletons wandered in Anger's direction. Anger dug a pit to settle in for the time being. As for the grain in the handcart, he dug another pit and buried it. It had to be said, the pit was dug very solidly. As evening approached, Anger noticed that the wandering skeletons in the distance all started digging pits in unison. One by one, they buried themselves, and then a wind began to rise. It was the wind of rest, the source of all living things in this land of death. It brings life to the corpses, skeletons, and soul fragments scattered across the land, nurturing them into skeleton mages and undead. But if one showed it the slightest disrespect, it would also mercilessly destroy everything. For an undead creature, prolonged exposure to the blowing wind of rest would cause its soul to slowly solidify and dry out, and then perish. Even the most powerful golden skeleton Lich King was no exception. The only difference was that they could endure it for longer. Anger lay in his sunken pit, listening to the howling of the wind of rest. His soul gradually calmed down. The wind of rest had a soothing effect on souls. As long as one wasn't directly in its path, it wouldn't cause the soul any harm. Lying in the pit, Ainge curiously extended a finger. He reached into that cold wind. The gray, mist-like wind of repose blew past his finger, forming tiny vortexes, and under the wind's caress, his entire palm turned a metallic silvery white. As the wind blew, a cool sensation traveled down from his palm, all the way into his soul fire, giving him a feeling of growing stronger, as if he were devouring a soul. This revitalized him. For a skeleton like him, the best way to grow stronger was to devour the souls of his own kind. However, he was a vegetable farming skeleton, so he didn't need to strengthen his spirit. Besides, in the Palace of Repose, he was the only one left now. There were no others of his kind for him to prey on. However, strengthening oneself is an instinct for every soul. After trying it, Ainge found the feeling irresistible and couldn't help but stick both his hands out. An entire night passed, and the sky began to brighten at dawn. The wind of repose stopped. Ainge felt his soul had become much more solid. He didn't know how much stronger he'd become, but his bones had changed dramatically. The pitted and uneven spots were much fewer, and some of the larger holes had shrunk. The smaller holes were completely filled in, as if they'd been smoothed over with putty. If I get blown by this wind a few more times, it seems I won't need to replace my bones. Ainge thought to himself as he climbed out of the pit. Ainge discovered that the human corpse from yesterday was gone. Looking up, he saw it had already been transformed into a zombie. Shuffling unsteadily away, Ainge ran over and dragged it back. The little zombie was scared to death, thinking Ainge was going to eat it. And it struggled desperately, but alas, even the withered and white-boned skeletons were scared off by Ainge, let alone a newly born little zombie like him. Ainge quickly stripped it bare, taking all the items that belonged to the human. A leather satchel, an empty water canteen, and a longsword. Inside the satchel, there was a map, and a few silver coins. There was nothing that could prove his identity, which means why this human came here and how he activated the teleportation circle might forever remain a mystery, unless Ainge could figure it out himself. If he couldn't figure out how to use the magic scroll, he might never be able to go back. Ainge looked at the much smoother pits and hollows on his bones. It seemed that not being able to go back wasn't such a bad thing, because of the wind of repose. Ainge settled down in this wilderness with peace of mind. Every day, he bathed in the gusts of the wind of repose, continuously strengthening his soul. The newborn little zombie gradually got familiar with Ainge. First, when Ainge dragged it away, it was scared half to death. It thought it was going to be eaten, but after stripping it, Ainge just ignored it. As a newborn zombie that had luckily escaped death, it wandered around aimlessly until the wind of repose began to blow. Being newly born, how could it withstand the harshness of the wind of repose? It instinctively started digging at the ground, trying to make a hole to hide in. But at its digging speed, before the hole was even finished, its soul would have probably been blown away. Fortunately, the pit Ainge was in wasn't far from it. Ainge braved the wind, went over, and dragged it into the pit. Compared to the little zombie, Ainge was far too powerful. Being in the same pit felt so oppressive it scared him, and he yelped as he tried to crawl out. But as soon as his head popped out, he was forced back by the chilly wind. In the end, he hugged his head and huddled at the very edge of the pit, shivering. Ainge paid him no mind, reaching out on his own to guide the cool aura. When dawn broke, the wind of repose stopped. The little zombie couldn't wait to crawl out. This time, the little zombie decided to get far away from this terrifying place, but he had only walked 3 meters when he was chased back by another wandering skeleton. The surrounding area had already become Ainge's territory. As long as the little zombie stayed inside, Ainge wouldn't bother him. But the moment he left this area, his newly formed soul was the most tender and delicious food. Anyone could bully him. After being chased by other skeletons a few times, the little zombie realized that other places were even scarier than here. Evening arrived, the wind of repose began to blow. The little zombie, unable to dig his own pit, timidly returned to Ainge's pit. He kept his neck stiff, constantly eyeing Ainge. Seeing that Ainge wasn't paying attention to him, he scooted in a little. Still no reaction, so he scooted in a little more. He kept scooting until he was back in the same corner he was in last night, even in the exact same position. Hugging his head, but he was no longer. Shivering, the next morning, he eagerly crawled out again. But when evening came, before the wind of repose even started to blow, he crawled into the pit early. He was no longer hugging his head. Instead, he curiously observed Ainge. He even tried to imitate him by stretching his palm out of the pit. Of course, this reckless move caused his soul to be mercilessly baptized by the chilly aura. Under Ainge's protection, the little zombie thrived. He safely passed his fledgling stage and became a tough-skinned zombie. This is the lowest level of zombie, on the same tier as a withered bone skeleton. But because it has a layer of flesh, its defense is higher. And its combat power is stronger than a withered bone skeleton's. And so, one day, the little zombie dragged a withered bone skeleton back to the pit and pushed it in front of Ainge. Ainge tilted his head. The little zombie nodded. He pushed the skeleton's skull towards Ainge. Ainge shook his head. The withered bone skeleton's soul was too weak. Devouring it would probably be less effective than bathing in the wind of repose. For growing stronger, the little zombie hung his head. He dejectedly dragged the skeleton away. But after that, all the nearby withered bone skeletons suffered. Not a single one could escape the little zombie's deadly grasp. If he ran into a white bone skeleton he couldn't beat, he would hide back in Ange's territory. Even the white bone skeletons didn't dare enter the surrounding area. Although there was now a diligent little zombie hunting nearby, it didn't affect the surrounding ecosystem. The empty spots were quickly filled by other wandering skeletons. Those skeletons discarded by the little zombie, after being blown by the wind of repose all night. A new soul would likely be born. This is the unchanging cycle of the undead. The only thing that changed was probably the strength of Ange's and the little zombie's souls. If nothing else had happened, Ange probably would have stayed in that pit forever. Just like how he had farmed vegetables for over 1,000 years. However, a sudden change occurred. One day, the little zombie scrambled back into the pit in a panic and gave Angar a shove. Then, he pointed frantically outside. On the little zombie's face was a new gash so deep you could see the bone, cut by who knows what. Angar poked his head out and saw only a gray bone skeleton. It was leading 20-something low-level skeletons, marching right into Angar's territory. Since it was also a gray bone skeleton, Angar had no level advantage over it. And under its command, the low-level skeletons also ignored his level suppression. Did this little zombie go and kick a skeleton's nest? Without another word, Angar dragged the little zombie and started running out of the pit. He figured, he probably couldn't beat a gray bone skeleton of the same level and its 20-something minions. They ran ahead, while the gray bone skeleton led its squad in pursuit. After a while, they were temporarily safe. Angar let out a breath and sent the question through his soul. The little zombie just stared blankly at Angar with wide eyes. His intelligence wasn't high enough to answer Angar's question. Fine, Angar gave up. The others of his kind back on the farm were all like this. If you asked them a question, they would just stare at you blankly. This little zombie was already pretty good, at least he knew to come back and warn him when being chased. If the little zombie hadn't run back, the gray bone skeleton would have only chased him. What would that have to do with me? You're going to get me killed. Angar tapped him on the skull. Because the little zombie had stirred up trouble for no reason, Angar was driven out of his den, his home for the past few months. It was getting dark soon. He had to find a place to shelter from the wind as quickly as possible. It was too late to go back, so Angar dug a pit right where he was. The little zombie hid inside. Since the pit was rather shallow, he also had to shovel the surrounding dirt back on top of the two of them. The next day, as soon as the wind stopped, Angar climbed out. He dug another pit a few meters away and tossed the little zombie into it. He decided not to let the little zombie hide in his pit anymore, lest he cause trouble and drag him into it again. However, that night, just as the wind started to blow, a head popped up and peeked over the edge of his pit. Seeing that Angar didn't shoo him away, he slid right in. The next day Angar tossed him out, and that night, he came running back again. It was like a game, until Angar dug a tunnel between the two pits. Only then did the game stop, because if he ran over again, Angar would just put him in the tunnel and make him crawl back on his own. Angar was a go-with-the-flow kind of skeleton, with no one ordering him around. He could farm for over 1,000 years. Now, having been driven out of his safe den, he didn't really mind. He just dug his new den to be even bigger and safer. Every day he'd stay in his den, channeling the wind of rest. The little zombie was much more active. The moment the wind stopped each day, he'd run outside. Low-level skeletons nearby once again suffered at his hands. His own soul, however, through this constant chaos, grew stronger and stronger. He thought today would be just like any other day. But not long after the wind started, Angar heard the sound of footsteps. Soon after, he saw a person slide into the pit. It was a human wearing a cloak. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, his face weathered by the elements. Holding an exquisite magic staff in his hand, a powerful magical energy surged from his body. This was a human mage. The mage had discovered Aang in the cavern. He gasped in surprise. A skeleton? How did a skeleton get up on this slope? Excuse me, sorry to bother you. Mind if I take shelter from the wind in here? The human mage was just asking casually. As everyone knows, skeletons must reach the gold level to possess intelligence. Ordinary ones act mostly on instinct. They attack whenever they sense a threat. For all he knew, this very skeleton might pounce on him the next moment. However, for someone who dared to walk in the land of the dead, the human mage naturally wouldn't be bothered by a mere gray-boned skeleton. He paid it no mind and took off his hood on his own. He waved a hand outside, and a massive skull poked into the pit, instantly filling up all the remaining space. It was a skeletal horse. Its hollow eye sockets flickered with an eerie blue soul fire. The pit wasn't very big, holding one skeleton, a human and the head of a skeletal horse. There wasn't even enough room to turn around. Aang shrank back to the entrance of the passage to another cavern, blocking the exit to make more room. With the wind of rest raging, why would a human mage appear here? Doesn't the wind of rest affect him? And even if it doesn't, how did his skeletal horse manage to endure it? Aang would soon find out. The human mage first glanced at him curiously, confirming that the skeleton had no intention of attacking. Then, he placed a hand on the skeletal horse's head. Wisps of black smoke began to rise from his palm, drilling their way into the horse's empty eye sockets, nostrils, and other cavities. Wherever the black smoke passed, the color of the skeletal horse's bones slowly lightened. It was then that Aang noticed the skeletal horse's bones had been eroded by the wind of rest. There were signs of decay on the surface. The wind of rest has a very strange mechanism. If a skeleton possesses a soul, the wind of rest will erode it. But if it's just a set of soulless remains, the wind of rest will actually protect it, slowing its decay and even nurturing a new soul fire within it, turning it into a skeleton. The skeletal horse had a soul fire, which is why its bones were being eroded. However, under the soothing touch of the black smoke, these signs of erosion slowly disappeared. Aang was starting to understand why this skeletal horse was able to travel through the wind of rest. It was because the human mage was constantly healing it. However, this was an act that consumed a great deal of magical power. After the black smoke enveloped the skeletal horse's head, the human mage seemed to realize something and slapped his forehead. He said with annoyance, "How stupid of me." The human mage reached out and twisted off the skeletal horse's head. A skeleton's soul fire is contained within its skull. After removing the skull, the rest of the skeletal horse's body outside the pit lost its soul fire. Now, the wind of rest wouldn't do it any harm. Holding the skeletal horse's skull, the human mage grinned sheepishly at Aang. "I was in such a rush, I forgot. Lucky I found your pit. Otherwise, this wretched wind would have blown us to bits out there. By the way, what are you doing up on this slope? This isn't really a place for skeletons like you. It's all gravel pits. Must be hard to dig in." Aang's hollow eye sockets stared at the mage, but he didn't say a word. "This isn't a place for skeletons," he thought to himself. "It seems you're right." After the terrain got higher, the skeletons disappeared. The little zombie has to walk down to the flat ground to find other skeletons. Seeing his blank look, the mage chuckled. "Don't mind me. I've been in this wasteland for so long, with no one to talk to, that my language skills have gotten rusty. So, I try to chat with anyone I come across." Ignoring Anger's reaction, the mage just started talking to himself, as if muttering to himself, "This road is getting harder and harder to travel. Do you know what this road used to be called? The Golden Road, Twin Route, the Cypress Path. That basin down there used to be a world transit station for the Undead Empire. But now it's become the territory of you little skeletons." After the Undead Empire vanished, business on this road got tougher and tougher. Looking at the old records, you could open any little shop on the road and make a fortune. Unlike now, where I can run back and forth for over half a month, and not even be sure I'll earn 2 months worth of rations. I'm so jealous you don't have to eat or drink. Only undead creatures like you all can stand living here. If only we could open the teleportation portal. Food from the Undead Empire could be sold here. The goods from here could be sold there. The trade route would be clear, and everyone would get rich. Oh, that's right, you undead don't need to eat. So why produce so much food? I'm being silly again. Not all undead belong to the Undead Empire. It's been almost 1,000 years. The skeletons that belong to the Undead Empire have probably all perished by now. The mage was just treating anger as a sounding board, not expecting any response. He just kept rambling on to himself. But there were other things Anger didn't understand. However, he did understand these last 2 parts. Undead creatures don't need to eat. Why would they produce so much food? Because that food is all grown by farming skeletons like Anger. The mage rambled on, and finally let out a long sigh. The underground city has been hit by another disaster. If we can't find a new food source, I'm afraid another group of people will starve. I hope we can open the portal this time. I hope the Undead Empire is still around." The mage spoke as if making a wish. After he finished muttering, he glanced at Anger. He looked at the silent Anger, gave a self-mocking laugh, and pulled up his cloak, slowly drifting off to sleep. Although the mage seemed to be unguarded, Anger could feel the soul fluctuations from the horse's skull, scanning over his body from time to time. Of course, even without the horse skull's watchfulness, Anger had no intention of provoking this mage. He was just a small, farming skeleton. He wasn't a troublemaker like the little zombie. He'd blocked the passage between the 2 pits for this very reason. He was afraid the little zombie would hear something and crawl over. The night passed silently. The next day, the mage woke up as soon as the wind died down. He rubbed his face vigorously, as if washing it. Once he was fully awake, he gave Anger a peculiar look and laughed. "You're a really quiet skeleton. It's rare to see one as quiet as you. I hope you're still around the next time I come by. It was a rather practical blessing. Skeletons in this area get replaced very quickly. There were a few more lively guys like Little Jong-hoo. Things would progress much faster. Ainge is already a very quiet skeleton. And yet, a mage still stumbled upon him. Thankfully, this mage meant no harm. If it had been another predator, he would have been in big trouble. So, staying alive until next time wasn't exactly an easy goal. It would take a lot of luck. The mage climbed out of the crypt. He pressed the skeletal horse's skull back onto its body, and with a whoosh, a jet of blue flame shot out of the skeletal horse's nostrils, and it scrambled to its feet. The mage took a couple of steps, leading the skeletal horse, when he suddenly remembered something. He turned back and said, "How rude of me. I forgot to give my name. My name is Aski. I'm a traveling merchant on the Golden Road, and also a necromancer." Aski performed a skeletal bow, nodded at Ainge, and then headed down the slope toward the plains. Watching Aski's receding figure, Ainge then glanced in the direction he was heading. The soulfire in Ainge's eyes flickered a few times. Who knows what was on his mind? He climbed out of the crypt and followed Aski from a distance. Aski hadn't gone far when he noticed Ainge. He stopped, and Ainge stopped too. He walked forward, and Ainge followed. He always kept a distance of several dozen meters. The old scamp was acting just like Little Jong-hoo. Without realizing it, Ainge had been influenced by Little Jong-hoo. This made Aski chuckle and shake his head. He stopped paying Ainge any mind. Down the slope, there were more skeletons on the road. The low-level ones were all scared off by the skeletal horse. Their path was clear all the way to the crypt Ainge had originally dug. A gray-boned skeleton climbed out of the crypt. It was the very one that had led the others to chase Ainge and Little Jong-hoo. Apparently, it had discovered the advantages of the crypt and claimed it for itself. While other skeletons were scared off by the skeletal horse, this gray-boned one wasn't intimidated. It climbed to the surface, arching its back. It opened its jaws and let out a spectral hiss. As if disturbed, more than 10 low-level skeletons crawled out one after another from near the crypt. Unlike last time they were chased, the gray-boned skeleton had far fewer minions. Only a dozen or so remained. Several of them had caved-in marks on their faces. Ainge strongly suspected this was Little Jong-hoo's handiwork. Ever since he was chased and beaten last time, and got that gash on his face, Little Jong-hoo had taken a great liking to smashing other creatures' faces. Several of the skeletons he dragged back had similar dents on their cheekbones. Lately, Little Jong had been leaving early and coming back late. Could he have been coming here to pick fights with the gray-boned skeleton's minions? Someone was trespassing on its territory, and the gray-boned skeleton was furious. It drew its bone sword, and at its command, its minions surged forward. The skeletal horse was actually only at the 100 bone level, one rank lower than the gray-boned skeleton. But it was several times larger. In theory, the skeletal horse's power shouldn't be any less than the gray-boned skeleton's. But the skeletal horse didn't engage the gray-boned skeleton. Instead, it promptly hid behind Aski. Aski stepped forward, empty-handed, and shaped his hands into claws. He made a grasping motion at the two skeletons in front. An invisible force immediately took effect between the skeletons and Aski. The skeleton's soulfire was actually being pulled out, strand by strand, forcefully torn from their skulls and gathered in his palm. Ainge's soul tensed up as he watched. What kind of magic was this? The soulfire was ripped out, condensing into two balls of soul flame in Aski's palm. He saw him rapidly chanting a spell, muttering unintelligibly. The sound was too faint, Ainge couldn't hear it clearly. Then, Aski flung the two balls of soul flame onto the ground. With a whoosh, two shrieking wraiths burst out from the exploding soul flames. They charged out, wildly pouncing on the gray-boned skeleton. The gray bone swung its bone sword, slashing at the wraiths. The bone sword sliced right through the middle of a wraith, but the creature, now split in two, was completely unharmed. After passing through the bone sword, it merged back into one and wrapped itself around the gray-boned skeleton. The gray-boned skeleton reached out and grabbed the wraith. The incorporeal wraith was somehow caught and pulled outwards. With a wicked cackle, the wraith extended its claws, frantically clawed at the gray-boned skeleton's eye sockets, which held its soulfire. The gray-boned skeleton seemed wary, twisting its head to dodge the wraith's scratching. Its other arm formed a fist, punching again and again at the wraith's form. The incorporeal wraith let out a piercing shriek as it was pummeled. Finally, one wraith was brutally beaten to death. The gray-boned skeleton continued to struggle with the other one. This bought Aski enough time. He was seen making a grasping motion with his left hand. Just like before, a soul was forcibly ripped out. It turned into a ball of soul flame as he quickly chanted a spell. Then he threw it to the ground, and the rising soul flame spread out like a ripple. Anything it touched was grabbed by two claws that formed and held it tightly in place. These claws looked flimsy. Ainge felt like he could break free. but the low-level skeletons couldn't. They were held firmly in place. They became living targets for Aski, one by one. Shadow bolts shot into the skeletons' eye sockets, shattering the soul fire within their skulls. After the gray-boned skeleton destroyed the two wraiths, it discovered that its dozen or so minions had all been turned into a pile of scattered bones. The gray-boned skeleton was now all alone. It was no match for Aski. He threw a ball of black flame at its head. Its entire skull caught fire. When the flames dissipated, the skull was perfectly intact, but the soul within had completely vanished. This gray-boned skeleton's forces were thus easily destroyed by Aski. And by the looks of it, he clearly wasn't using his full strength. Even his skeletal horse, which could take on the gray bone alone, didn't make a move. Aski didn't show any excitement, as if he had just completed a very simple task. He glanced back at Ainge, then led his skeletal horse towards the stone pillars. Reaching this cavern that Ainge had dug meant they were not far from the two stone pillars of the spatial portal. Arriving before the pillars, Aski began to work on them on his own. He was seen taking something from a pouch at his waist. He took out several blue crystals and embedded them into several spots on the pillars. Then, he walked before the pillars and knelt down solemnly. As he knelt in worship, the two stone pillars slowly lit up. Although the pillars lit up, the membrane of light did not appear. Aski walked around the pillars a few times, but nothing unusual happened. This made him incredibly disappointed, and he let out a long sigh. He pried the crystals he had installed back out, and the pillars dimmed. Ainge watched from a distance, seeing Aski's futile efforts. Njay glanced down at his wrist. The light demon had ultimately turned into this leather strap on it. Does it need a leather test to open the portal? He wondered, as he saw Aski pry off the crystal. The stone pillar dimmed again. Njay knew that the key to his getting home most likely lay in those crystals. The crystal he had pried off was a full size smaller than when he had first installed it. Aski blew on it with a pained expression, then placed it back in his bag. He started back the way he came, and as he passed Njay, Aski shrugged, saying with a bitter expression, "It was a failure. It still won't open. Perhaps we'll have to learn your ways of survival ahead of schedule." "My way of survival? Growing vegetables?" Njay tilted his head, then lifted his foot and followed him again. Noticing Njay was still following him, Aski chuckled. "Why are you still following me? Planning to come back to the underground city with me? Well, that's fine, I guess. The wilderness is too dangerous. I might not see you again the next time I come out here. If you want to follow, then go ahead." Njay tilted his head. He had a feeling Aski misunderstood something. The underground city, does it have blue crystals? As they neared his burrow, from a distance, they saw a zombie sprawled in front of Njay's burrow, wailing. When the little zombie woke up and found Njay missing, it immediately refused to go out anymore. It just stayed outside the burrow, wailing. Perhaps it thought that if it just wailed loudly enough, Njay would reappear, and sure enough, after wailing for ages, Njay showed up. The little zombie leapt up in excitement, crying out as it ran towards Njay. After that, it refused to leave his side for anything. And so, Aski continued on his way, and Njay continued to follow. Except now, he had a little tail. The little zombie followed right at Njay's heels. One man, one steed, a skeleton, and a zombie. What a strange group. They made their way up the hillside, all the way to the very top. Over the crest was a vast, endless wasteland. Flat and desolate, with no end in sight. They walked in one direction from morning until dusk. It was almost time for the wind of respite to rise. Suddenly, on the ground up ahead that looked perfectly flat, a trench appeared out of nowhere, as if a great fissure had been sliced into the earth. It was a deep depression. Seeing this trench, Aski's face lit up in a huge grin. He said excitedly, "I was worried we wouldn't make it and would have to spend another night out here. Hurry up, we've made it to the underground city." Just as Njay's group entered the area of the trench, the wind on the wasteland began to pick up, but it was blocked by the rim. The wind that made it down into the trench was much weaker, providing shelter just like a burrow. Njay looked up, feeling the biting wind howl past over his head. That sinister, cold feeling was even stronger here than it was in the burrow. Channeling that chilling aura here would probably be more efficient than in the burrow. Aski glanced back at Njay and said, "Come on. Hurry, be careful this wretched wind doesn't blow you away." After saying that, Aski's habit of talking to himself flared up again, and he began to mutter. This place used to be a great river. The water flowed all the way here, hit the volcanic rock, and seeped underground. It carved out a vast underground space. Our underground city is built in that space, thanks to these caverns. Otherwise, all of us would have been killed by the wailing wind long ago. Aski muttered to himself, not expecting a reply. Just as he said, walking through the wastelands all day, with no one to talk to, he had developed this habit of talking to himself about anything and everything. He used to talk to his horse, Now, talking to a skeleton wasn't so strange. Besides, he had a feeling that this little skeleton, Aang, could actually understand what he was saying. At least, much more than his dumb old horse ever did. Aang listened silently while observing his surroundings. Perhaps because the wind of respite was blocked outside, the environment in here was much better than outdoors. In a corner, there were even shrubs, and moss grew on the shaded side of a rock. From time to time, you could see some insects moving about. In a bush up ahead, a rock caught Aang's attention. On that very rock, a black smoke, invisible to the naked eye, was coiled. Seeing Aang look over, the smoke stirred and slowly coalesced into a human face. That was Black Face, a ghost, and the pet of the old lich, Phylon. "This is a little one I brought back. Don't you go scaring him," Aeski introduced, then turned to the ghost and said a few words. RR, the face formed by the smoke revealed 2 empty sockets where its eyes should have been. Its gaze lingered deeply on Aang and the little zombie for a moment. Then it dissolved back into a cloud of smoke and coiled around the rock. Continuing further down, there was a fissure on the side of the trench bottom. It was over 10 meters wide and about 4 or 5 meters high. It was the entrance to the underground city. At this moment, at the entrance, a person holding an exquisite staff stood there, craning their neck to peer back up the gully. This was a gaunt, skinny person. The skin visible outside their clothes had no luster at all. It was wrinkled, and their muscles looked as if they had lost all their moisture, completely dry. There was no elasticity at all. Their eye sockets were deeply sunken, and their cheekbones were high. They looked just like a dried corpse. This was, in fact, a dried corpse. Upon seeing this person, Aeski waved from a distance. "Phylon, what are you doing here? Don't tell me you're here to welcome me? That's too grand an honor." It was none other than the master of that ghost from before, the old lich, Phylon. Phylon gave a slight, kind smile and said, "Black Face. Saw you were back, so I came to take a look." "So, any luck?" the old lich asked gently. But Aeski knew what he was really asking. He was just trying not to put too much pressure on him. Aeski forced a smile onto his face and shook his head. "No, they're short on food too. They refused to sell." Phylon nodded, somewhat disappointed. "That's to be expected. There are fewer and fewer places that can grow crops. No one has a surplus of food. If they sell it to us, some of their own people will starve. Don't take it to heart. It's not your fault." Aeski gave an awkward chuckle. "Since we couldn't buy any grain anyway, I took a trip to the Sea of the Departed. But the teleportation portal still won't open, and the magic crystal has shrunk quite a bit." Feline, however, didn't seem to care after hearing this, and instead looked a little disappointed. "Still won't open? That's to be expected. It's been 1,000 years. Who knows what's become of the Palace of Repose? I hope His Highness is at peace. If the magic crystal shrinks, then let it shrink. We can't buy grain, and it's not like we can eat the magic crystal. Don't worry about it, you must be tired. Go back and get some rest." Feline's gentle words of comfort made Esk's eyes turn red. He sniffled, and after walking past Feline, he managed to force a smile. "I ran into a quiet skeleton in the Sea of the Departed. He followed me back on his own. Haha, I suspect he can understand what I'm saying, almost like he's intelligent." Esk's words made Feline shift his gaze, casually sizing up Anger. It wasn't until his eyes fell on Anger's wrist that he suddenly froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Esk had already walked into the entrance and didn't see Feline's strange reaction. Feline stumbled over to Anger, completely ignoring his exquisite staff. He tossed it carelessly to the ground and reached out with a trembling hand. He wanted to take Anger's hand, but stopped halfway, realizing something was wrong. He quickly pulled his hand back, looking completely flustered. If Esk hadn't gone inside, seeing the usually calm and composed old lich in such a state, his eyes would have probably popped out of his head. Feline was agitated for a good while, before looking at Anger with eyes full of hope and asking, "Are you the new Lord Watcher?" "Watcher? What's that?" Anger tilted his head. He looked at the old lich in confusion. Anger's emotion was confusion, but he was a skeleton, so his eye sockets couldn't convey any emotion. To the old lich, his head tilting gesture looked more like a sign of sternness. This frightened the old lich, who immediately reacted by clamping a hand over his own mouth. He didn't say anything. "I don't know anything." With his mouth covered, Feline's words came out muffled, but his once cloudy eyes had become bright and full of life, as if shining with the light of hope. Feline's strange actions left Anger a bit baffled. He stood there blankly, watching him. This blank stare, however, was interpreted in Feline's eyes as something else, dissatisfaction. The Lord Watcher is very displeased. Feline's heart skipped a beat. He realized he had lost his composure. He quickly rubbed his face to get his expression back to normal. Then picked up his staff from the ground and straightened his clothes. Finally, he stood up straight. Although his expression was still a bit unnatural, you could no longer see his earlier lack of composure. Esk returned from the entrance. "What's wrong, my lord?" he asked in surprise. "This is just a little fella. You didn't scare him, did you?" "Little fella?" Feline's heart skipped a beat. He carefully glanced at Anger. He didn't seem to react, so Feline breathed a sigh of relief. Out loud, he said, "He is indeed a quiet friend," while stepping aside. Then he roared internally, "Little fella? His age is probably older than your great-great-great-great. He's older than your great-great-grandfather, and you dare call him a kid?" Aang was a little unsettled by Phylin's strange behavior and quickly went over to Esk. Esk gave Phylin a puzzled look, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He then turned to Aang and said, "Don't be afraid. Phylin is a good guy. There's a kind of spiritual pressure between you undead creatures. You'll get used to it. The underground city is just through this door. It's very safe here. There are no predators. As long as you don't go around attacking people, you'll live until your bones turn to dust. Just find a spot you like and hang out. Come find me if you need anything." After rambling on for a while, Esk led Aang away. Phylin wiped the non-existent cold sweat from his forehead and let out a long sigh of relief. But his expression quickly turned to one of excitement. A watcher has appeared. The underground city can be saved. If Phylin hadn't been a lich who's lived for over 1,000 years, and if he hadn't worked at the World Transfer Station, he might never have even known about the Watchers. Watchers are the masters of the teleportation channels, the observers and guardians of the worlds. It isn't an official title, just something within the World Transfer Station. A commonly used title among those in the know, though it was never acknowledged by the Watchers themselves. The Great Watchers don't have a fixed form. Sometimes they are skeletons, zombies, or even ghosts. Their common feature is that they all wear a magical leather accessory. The lack of a fixed form means that none of them are the Watcher's true body. Instead, they are projections of consciousness. A powerful Watcher projects their consciousness from somewhere else into a temporary vessel to observe and protect the World Transfer Station. Because of the vessel, the Watcher's strength isn't very great, and they might occasionally be killed by some bored fool. But it doesn't matter. It's just a temporary vessel, after all. It doesn't actually harm the Watcher. On the contrary, those who kill the vessel will have to face the Great Watcher's wrath, the angriest he ever got. The teleportation channel sent over a squad of powerful Black Knights, a full 12 of them. They slaughtered all 400 members of that troublesome demon merchant guild. After that, no one dared to casually kill those inconspicuous skeletons and zombies anymore. Unless the skeletons or zombies attacked first. Many people say that the Watchers are likely projections of the Monarch Lord himself. Otherwise, how could they command an entire team of Black Knights? Of course, that was almost 1,000 years ago, ever since the World Transfer Station closed. This already barren and desolate world of the dead has gradually returned to its natural state. Without the transit trade from the Undead Empire, the economy here has declined. Food production has decreased, and the population has plummeted. The survivors are hiding in a few underground cities, barely getting by. But now, even that might be impossible. The underground city's food production decreases every year. It might not even be able to feed the more than 5,000 people we have now. If a new food source isn't found, many people in the underground city will likely starve to death. This is a terrible humanitarian disaster that Phylin is desperately trying to avoid. He sent out several groups of envoys to other underground cities to try and purchase food. But without exception, they were all rejected. This was to be expected. It's not just our underground city that's short on food, the others are too. If they sell food to others, they themselves will starve. Under normal circumstances, Phylin would have started a war by now. Mobilize all the dungeon's forces to go and seize food from others. However, the winds of respite prevented this from happening. No dungeon can withstand the winds of respite. To wage war, that path simply isn't an option. The only option left might be the undead scourge. However, at this critical juncture, the Watcher has appeared. What does this mean? It means the World Transit Station might reopen. And even if it doesn't, with the Watcher's power, resolving a minor food supply issue would be effortless. They wouldn't have to take that final step. At this thought, a hopeful expression ignited on Phylin's face. The wind elementals lifted his body, and he floated into the dungeon, his feet never touching the ground. He passed through a dimly lit tunnel, and the view before him suddenly opened up. A gently downward sloping ramp extended into a vast underground space. Countless homes, carved out of the slopes, stretched down along two main thoroughfares. Oil lamps were lit along both sides of the main roads, providing illumination. All sorts of creatures walked and talked along the paths, creating a bustling scene. Essek, walking ahead, turned back and said to Aang, "You'll be safe once you're in here, as long as you don't go attacking anyone. No one will harm you. Well then, may your soul be at peace. See you around." After speaking, Essek got onto a wooden cableway and slid toward the opposite cliff face. He had already met with Phelin, but Phelin wasn't the only administrator in the dungeon. He still needed to report the situation to the other leaders. Aang and the little zombie were just left there, feeling a bit lost. Watching Essek glide further away on the cableway, a clattering sound rang out. Aang turned to look and saw a skeleton carrying a wooden basket on its back. It was filled with chunks of coal, and it was walking up the stairs. The little zombie's eyes lit up at the sight. He grinned and was about to pounce. Back in the Sea of the Departed, he hunted skeletons from dawn till dusk every day. He had been walking all day today, and hadn't eaten a thing. He was starving. Aang grabbed him by the collar, stopping him in his tracks. Essek had told them several times not to attack anyone. A skeleton probably counts as anyone, right? Aang dragged the little zombie down the path. The paths grew more crowded, and among the people were many skeletons and zombies. They were either carrying things in wooden baskets on their backs, or turning winches to draw water. And other such repetitive jobs. In these skeletons and zombies, Aang saw a reflection of himself. He also performed repetitive tasks, like growing vegetables in the skeleton workshop. With these skeletons and zombies around, Aang and the little zombie didn't stand out at all. No one on the path gave them a second glance. Everyone was busy with their own work. For some reason, every single person wore a worried expression. It was the first time Aang had ever realized that there were so many different races in the world. There were humans, like Essek, minotaurs with the heads of bulls, and creatures with long arms that walked on their forelimbs like cave dwellers. There were even succubi, with goat-like features but incredibly voluptuous figures. All kinds of creatures, too numerous to list. Of course, the most numerous were still the skeletons and zombies. Almost all of the repetitive labor was performed by skeletons and zombies. Carrying his things on a pole, he led the little zombie by the hand, wandering aimlessly. The farther they walked, the more remote the area became, and the fewer people they saw. Eventually, in a remote corner of the sprawling underground city, Aang found a patch of soft, flat ground and stopped there. The reason he stopped was that the soil here was very soft, fertile, and moist. As a vegetable planting skeleton, Aang was very sensitive to soil. What kind of land was good for planting? He could tell at a glance. The soil here was very fertile, but it was too damp, and there was no sunlight. Even the farms at the Palace of Rest had sunlight, the underground city had none. But no sunlight didn't mean there were no plants. On the rock walls at the edge of the camp grew a type of glowing moss. This didn't surprise Aang. If moss could grow on rocks under the setting sun, why not in an underground city that merely lacked sunlight? It had been several months since he was teleported here, and Aang hadn't planted anything in a long time. Seeing the soft soil and plants that were able to grow here, the planting instinct engraved in his soul began to stir. There was no sun, so there was no need to hide from it. There was no wind of rest, so he didn't need to dig a burrow. Having stopped, Aang simply started to work with the moss, gathering the glowing kind from all around. While Aang was gathering moss, in the underground city's council hall, a fierce argument erupted, primarily between two people, the succubus Lena and the goblin Craig. The reason was that SK had failed to buy any grain. The underground city was now facing a life or death situation, and they needed to make a final decision. Lena said furiously, "Your proposal is inhumane, cruel, and immoral. If you drive these people out into the wilderness, you're sentencing them to death." "This is murder," Craig replied calmly. "I'm not human to begin with, so why should I be humane? Driving out some of the people is to ensure the rest can survive. Isn't that the most moral choice? If we don't do this, by this time next year, we will all have starved to death." Lena retorted furiously, "That's a twisted argument. What gives you the right to decide who gets driven out, and how many? And who gets to live? You don't have that right." Craig said flatly, "I'm not the one who decides how many people to drive out. The food decides. The amount of food we have determines how many people can survive. The rest will be driven out. Let them fend for themselves. Otherwise, once all the food runs out, every single one of them will die anyway." Lena said, "We can just work harder. Keep the magic lamps lit longer. We can all contribute more magic to them. If everyone pulls together, we can definitely overcome this difficulty. And after this year? What about next year?" Craig said dismissively. "This world was never meant to support this many people in the first place. It was only because of the Undead Empire's world transit hub and the wealth it left behind that we managed to survive for another 1,000 years. Now, we truly can't sustain this any longer. We shouldn't try to fight against fate. Let things return to how they were always meant to be." After a pause, Craig added, "If we drive out the non-essential population now, we can at least be selective about it. To retain more valuable, high-end talent. Once the food is depleted, you won't even be able to select who survives. Noble mages will starve to death just like giants. Brilliant goblin engineers will rot just like those who only know how to strike a pose. And capture the hearts of fanboys, the succubi. Now that's a real waste." He didn't miss the chance to put down the succubi, which made Lena so angry she snapped. She turned to Felon and said, "Lord Felon, Craig's proposal is too absurd and cruel. Please, Lord Felon, use your veto power to reject his proposal." Felon nodded. "It is indeed too cruel. But, Lena, if it were me, I would suggest unleashing the undead scourge." What? The moment Felon finished speaking, it wasn't just Lena and Craig. But everyone in the entire council chamber was shocked into silence. As its name implies, the undead scourge is a cataclysm unleashed by the undead to turn everyone else into undead. In other words, it means killing every living thing in the underground city. This was far more cruel than Craig's plan to expel a portion of the population. And he was fully capable of doing it. All the undead creatures in the city were under Felon's command. He only needed to have the thought, and the undead scourge would be unleashed. For a moment, everyone thought they had misheard. Lena, in particular, couldn't believe that the ever-benevolent and kind Lord Felon could utter such terrifying words. She instinctively tried to find an excuse for him. Lord Felon's meaning is to turn everyone into liches? Felon shook his head. There aren't enough materials. At most, we could transform 3 or 5. It would be meaningless. Then, what you mean is? Craig asked cautiously. He could accept expelling a portion of the population, because he would never be among those expelled. But if it was the undead scourge, then he'd have to fight others for those 3 or 5 spots for transformation. Felon let out a soft sigh and asked in a grave tone, "Do you all know what the greatest achievement of our city's development is today?" The sudden shift in topic was a bit jarring. The council members shook their heads in confusion. "It's the atmosphere of harmonious coexistence. When all of you first arrived here, the minotaurs and goblins were still attendants, and the succubi were still slaves to humans. Many races still considered each other food. Do you know what will happen when the food is gone? What hungry people will do?" Some guessed what Felon was about to say, and grim expressions appeared on their faces. It was something they had truly never considered before. "Perhaps they'll take the newborn calf from our neighbor, Mrs. Minotaur, and wash it clean. Throw it in a pot. They'll skewer the goblins, sprinkle them with seasoning, and put them in the oven. They'll chop off the succubi's hooves to stew in a soup." Felon's description sent a chill down everyone's spine. And yet, it was a very real possibility. Starving animals will even turn on their own kind, let alone different races that once preyed upon each other for food. It's just that such a history was too distant for them to remember. Only an immortal lich like Felon would remember events from 1,000 years ago. If you all begin to turn on each other, then the living undead and the liches will never again believe in so-called peaceful coexistence. At that point, this place will become like the Age of Demons, where humans were enslaved and slaughtered. Or it will be like Handong City, where minotaurs are only fit to pull carts, and succubi are chained up to entertain clients. Rather than let it come to that, I would rather unleash the scourge, the souls of several thousand people. It should be able to create 10 odd undead or liches, then we would at least have a dozen peaceful souls left. In the end, Feline made the final decision. The food can last for another half a year. During this half a year, we won't even mention expelling the lower class population. Everyone, break open what you can and eat. If we still can't find a solution after we've eaten everything, then we'll all die together, and silently pray that we can retain our memories from our past lives, and be reborn as liches or undead." Feline laid out a very cruel timeline for everyone, but he himself didn't want to see things develop to that point. So after the meeting, he secretly came to find Ange. Don't be fooled by Ange coming to such a remote place. It was still very easy for Feline to find him, because he had eyes and ears all over the entire underground city. Specters were spread throughout every corner of the city. They were a powerful tool for maintaining order. Without such efficient means, it would have been impossible for Feline to manage this racially mixed underground city and turn it into a place where everyone lived in harmony and enjoyed their life and work. Upon seeing Ange, a fawning smile immediately appeared on Feline's face. He scurried over to Ange and said eagerly, my lord, my apologies for disturbing you. I'm truly sorry, but I had no other choice. I had to come and ask for your help. It's mainly because the World Transit Station has closed. We have no way to buy food. We've struggled for nearly 1,000 years. We can't hold on much longer. I've come to buy food. I hope, my lord, that you can sell some food to us. Feline bowed, wringing his hands with an extremely cautious look, and pointed at Ange's pishy wristband. He looked nothing like the domineering figure who had given the final ultimatum in the meeting room. But he didn't feel the slightest bit awkward doing so. The one before him was one of the Watchers. He could very well be a projection of the legendary undead king who rules all realms. What's wrong with being a little humble? Just being able to speak to him was in supreme honor. Ange tilted his head, looking at him with confusion. Feline suddenly remembered something and said with realization, an equivalent exchange. An equivalent exchange? Here, 10 soul crystals. The portal has been closed for 1,000 years. I'm not sure if the price is still the same. It used to be 1 soul crystal for a few caddies of food." As Feline spoke, he took out 10 black crystals from his robes and handed them to Ainge. "Soul crystals. What are those? Are they like the crystals used to activate the stone pillars?" Ainge wondered in confusion. He reached out and took them. The moment the soul crystals were in his hand, Ainge knew what they were for. Soul crystals. Crystals condensed from soul energy. A medium of exchange common among the undead. As for mediums of exchange, different beings use different things. Humans prefer to use precious metals. Mages prefer to use magic crystals, and undead creatures prefer to use soul crystals. This is because soul crystals are formed from condensed, pure soul energy. After getting them, you can not only spend them, but also consume them to replenish your soul energy. But soul energy is only useful to undead creatures. Therefore, soul crystals only circulate among the undead. The moment Ainge touched them, he knew how to use them. It was like how a human knows they can drink water just by seeing it. Ainge looked at the soul crystals in his hand, then looked at the pishy on his wrist. He directly held the soul crystals against the pishy and began to refine them. The 10 soul crystals transformed into soul energy. The vast majority of it was absorbed by the pishy. Almost as soon as the energy was absorbed, Pishy lit up, and with a whoosh, Anger's consciousness was pulled to another place. He composed himself and took a look. It was the archway near the Palace of Rest's farm. Anger had actually teleported back. However, only his consciousness had returned, not his physical body. His mind moved with his will. Anger thought of the farmland. The whoosh, his consciousness arrived at the farmland's location. There was nothing on the empty fields. Even the birds that used to chirp and chatter were gone. Other than that, nothing had changed from when he left. He thought of the granary, and with a whoosh, his consciousness was inside it, looking at the grain that filled the entire space. Anger thought of Phylan. He was the one who traded soul crystals for grain. What if I take this grain out for him? As soon as the thought formed, the grain within his sight began to disappear, one sack after another. 1 sack, 2 sacks, 3 sacks. A full 45 sacks vanished. Only then did Anger feel a resistance, and the sacks stopped disappearing. Where did they go? Anger wondered. His consciousness pulled back. He focused his vision and saw that he was standing in a circle formed by the sacks, which surrounded him. Outside the circle was Phylan, smiling so wide his eyes had disappeared. 45 sacks. A full 45 sacks. Even though it's 5 sacks less than before, it's perfectly normal. After 1,000 years, the price has only gone up by 10%. What a bargain. I'll have someone come move them right away. Phylan, afraid that delays might bring trouble, summoned a group of skeletons. Each one shouldered a sack, and in one go, they carried all 45 sacks of grain away. Looking at the now quiet surroundings, Anger recalled Phylan's words. Most of the soul crystal's energy was absorbed by Pishy, but a small portion was absorbed by Anger. Could it be because of that portion I absorbed, that there were 5 fewer sacks? He checked his own soul. It did seem to have grown a little stronger. Anger tilted his head and tossed the question aside. His consciousness returned to Pishy. Following his will, Pishy lit up again, and with a whoosh, it sucked his consciousness back in. Did Pishy absorb the soul crystal's energy? Is that why I can return here at any time? Anger's consciousness returned once more to the farm and the granary. He couldn't make any more sacks of grain appear outside. However, he could make some small stones appear. After trying a few times, he realized that the soul crystals infused into Pishy had an energy that was tied to weight. Once the corresponding weight was transferred out, nothing more could be moved. But there was probably a little bit left, less than the weight of 1 sack, which is why he could move the lighter stones. There wasn't much to see on the farm. Over these 1,000 plus years, Anger had already explored every single corner. After a little while, it became boring. Just as he was about to leave, he habitually glanced in the direction of the Palace of Rest. The Palace of Rest was majestic, even though its king had been gone for over 1,000 years. It was still a forbidden place that Anger was unwilling to set foot in. Before, he had no choice, and had to go inside to search for usable bones, but even then, he only dared to search along the edges. He never dared to go deeper. Even now that he could move his consciousness freely, why not go and see the depths of the Palace of Rest? A bold idea popped into Anger's mind. With a flicker of thought, clang, Nji's consciousness slammed into something. His consciousness was thrown back. When he came to, he saw. He was blocked from the most central area of the Anxi Palace. Inside was the domain of the king and his subjects. Clearly, some kind of barrier was preventing Nji's consciousness from entering this area. But Nji didn't feel much of anything. He was neither surprised nor disappointed. He turned and floated towards the tallest tower to the east. The Anxi Palace was enormous. It had 5 major building complexes. The center, of course, was the core area of the Anxi Palace. The other 4 major complexes were situated at the 4 corners in a symmetrical arrangement. The tower on the eastern side was the tallest. With a whoosh, Nji's consciousness entered it. He didn't encounter any barrier. From the outside, it looked like a tall tower. But upon entering, it was like a chimney. The internal structure had no floors or partitions. It was just a straight, cylindrical space that went all the way down to the base of the tower. It was completely empty inside. There was nothing there. Only in the very center, on the floor, was a small lectern with a book placed on top. A small lectern holding a book. These were the only 2 things in the entire tower. Nji's consciousness floated over and touched the book. He was stunned to discover that this was actually a book made of brass. It was hard and heavy. As Nji touched it, with a swoosh, the brass book flipped open, and a giant illusion shot up into the air. It instantly filled the entire interior space of the tower. It was an illusion of the book itself. Nji was starting to understand why this tower had been built so tall. If it weren't this tall, it certainly wouldn't have been able to contain the book's illusion. The illusion of the book stood open, displaying its inner pages. Originally, the pages were blank, but after it opened, large, golden characters began to appear on the pages. Nji tilted his head. TFIEMB Ryer. He stared blankly, not moving for a long time. An illusion of a brass dragon emerged from the book's pages. It said, somewhat puzzled, "I am the Great Small Skull." Hee, you don't know how to read, do you? Nji nodded. "If you can't read, what are you doing in a library?" "Nonsense," the brass dragon grumbled. "Fine, although I could recite it for you. That would be so tasteless. It's your lucky day." A stream of information poured into Nji's soul, imprinting itself directly onto it. "Your soul is quite spiritually aware. Why is it only at the gray level?" The brass dragon muttered to itself, puzzled. Nji was confused. He didn't understand what that meant, but he could now understand the words on the book's pages. The information the brass dragon had imprinted on his soul was, surprisingly, the knowledge of written language. The words on the page read, "The brass book. Omniscient. You may only ask one question each time. Unintelligible text. 00 Ray OCTR Lewin." Nji tilted his head and asked with his soul, "Who are you?" Ha 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 ha. Finally, someone has asked this question. Oh my goodness, you are so clever. To think you would even come up with that question. The brass dragon was so excited. It nearly leapt right off the page. The people who are normally allowed into the library all know about the brass dragon. Plus, the rule here is that you can only ask one question. No one would waste a precious opportunity to ask who the brass dragon is. The brass dragon is the brass dragon. Who else could he be? Good kid, you asked the right question. Now listen closely. I am the brass book, the god of knowledge, the omniscient Negress. Negress's voice was like a great bell, rumbling within Aang's soul. Aang tilted his head, looking at him. Negress also craned his neck, eyeing Aang. After staring at each other for a long moment, Negress couldn't hold back any longer and asked, "Have you never heard my name before?" Aang nodded. Negress sighed. "I knew it, a little thing like you. What could you possibly know? Don't you have any other questions to ask?" Aang tilted his head again, his soul projecting a confused query. "One question. No, that doesn't count. That last one wasn't a question, it was a reward. Those who know my divine name, just by calling upon me, can ask me one question every day," Negress said hurriedly. Originally, that was a mischievous trap set by Negress. If someone asked who he was, after answering, he would tell them that counted as their one question. Then, just as they were overcome with regret and despair, he would tell them they could call upon his divine name to ask him questions, one per day. To have fought so hard just to get into the library, only to ask one question. And have that turn into asking one question every day. Of course that's a reward. And he could watch the person's expression change from deep despair to immense joy. A huge upswing and downswing. Amidst this extreme emotional shift, he could satisfy his own twisted sense of humor. However, from the moment he was sealed here, for thousands of years, not a single person had fallen into this trap. After fighting so hard to get a chance, who would come in without first finding out about Negress's origins? As for what his divine name was, nobody cared. No matter how powerful a god, wasn't he still sealed in here? Could he be more powerful than the undead king? Thousands of years had passed, and he finally met someone who fell for the trap. But it had to be an unconventional guy like Aang. After asking who he was, he genuinely didn't plan to ask anything else. It almost drove Negress mad. "Go on, ask another one. I am the omniscient god of knowledge. There is nothing I do not know." Aang's indifferent attitude was starting to annoy Negress, and he couldn't help but urge him on. He was ready to answer Aang's question perfectly, to make him feel the power of the god of knowledge. Aang thought for a moment, then asked, "Where did the king go?" The giant illusion of the brass book snapped shut with a thud, trapping the illusion of the brass dragon inside. Then it shrank rapidly, back into the physical brass book on the small lectern. With a snap, the physical brass book also slammed shut. The brass dragon's voice echoed through the space. Negris's annoyed voice, I don't know. Of all the questions you could ask, you just had to ask that one. Negris himself wanted to know where the undead king went. He's just a little skeleton. But his personality is so strange and his question is so tricky. He's not playing along at all. I'm done. I'm on strike. Looking at the space that had returned to normal, Aang tilted his head. His consciousness withdrew. The little tantrum the brass dragon threw had no effect on him at all. Aang was just a small skeleton. He didn't have that many questions that needed answering. His consciousness shifted, and just as he was about to float toward another cluster of buildings, Aang felt someone push him. It was his physical body that was pushed. Aang's consciousness returned to his body. He immediately felt someone frantically shaking his body. He turned his head to look, and saw it was the little zombie. Seeing that Aang was responding, the anxiously howling little zombie continued to cry out, desperately pointing in one direction. Aang looked where the little zombie was pointing and saw a tough-skinned zombie shuffling over from the distance. Its eyes were rolled back, and its arms were stretched out long. It lunged aggressively toward Aang. Does this count as an unprovoked attack? A question popped into Aang's soul. He reached for his waist, drew his scythe, and swung it deftly. Aang didn't know how to fight. He was a vegetable farming skeleton, but he had used a scythe for over 1,000 years to harvest crops. He could fell a crop neatly with a single swing. As long as he treated his opponent like a crop, Aang could slice wherever he pleased. The sharp scythe instantly severed the zombie's neck. The head tumbled off, rolling all the way to the little zombie's feet. The little zombie jumped in fright and instinctively clapped both hands to its own neck. It stared in terror at the scythe in Aang's hand, and just as terrified as the little zombie was the person controlling the zombie. In some dark corner of the dungeon, a necromancer in a black robe shot up from his chair. He instinctively clutched his own neck. A moment ago, the necromancer's consciousness had been projected into the zombie's body, so he felt everything the zombie did. Aang's scythe felt as if it had sliced his own neck. This sort of thing wasn't a first for him. This time it was so sudden, the necromancer was completely unprepared. It gave him a huge scare. Once he came to his senses, he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and tried to contact the zombie again. But found the connection was lost. What a loss. That zombie had the highest affinity with me. What kind of lousy skeleton is that? And how is its weapon so sharp? It's so fast, too. The mage muttered to himself. No, I have to go take a look. Best if I can get that skeleton and zombie back for myself. The necromancer stood up, went to the wall, and pressed it lightly. A pulse of magical energy was triggered, aligning with a mechanism within the wall. A hidden door in the wall swung open. Stepping through the hidden door, he entered a long, narrow passageway. Both sides of the passage were lined with recessed alcoves. The layout was a bit like a walk-in closet, but when he walked up to those alcoves to look, he saw that what was stored inside them wasn't clothing, but rows of zombies and skeletons. The necromancer looked around, making his selection. He finally settled on one with a delicate bone structure. Pristine, fine-boned skeleton. He muttered, I'll use you. Though your skeleton is incomplete, and your shoulder blade is a bit misshapen. Your bone density is the highest. You must have been well fed when you were alive. Placing one hand on the skeleton's skull, the necromancer began to murmur an incantation. Controlling this pristine white skeleton, he walked out. Esk always said the dungeon was safe. As long as you don't attack others, no one will harm you. But Eske only saw the skeleton zombies controlled by Phylan. These could be considered registered undead, under Phylan's control. They were very safe, no one would dare to actively harm them. However, Eske overlooked one problem. Outside, the wind of rest was howling. Over the years in the underground city, a large number of residents had also died of old age or accidental death. Their bodily remains, wouldn't they also spawn undead under the influence of the wind of rest? So where did these wild undead go? As a human, Eske didn't notice the difference between the wild and the registered ones at all. Seeing the streets full of skeleton zombies, he just assumed all undead were safe. However, evil often lurks in corners that even Phylan doesn't notice. Ainge and the little zombie were targeted the moment they entered. Ainge was a masterless gray skeleton. Wandering the streets without a steady job was a clear sign of being masterless. But the little zombie was unusually active. This was not like a dull, slow zombie, but more like a young lich. A lich, an intelligent creature is called a lich. One without intelligence is called a zombie. In terms of both potential and practicality, an intelligent lich surpasses a zombie by hundreds of times. Moreover, a lich can easily be trained into a powerful spellcaster. Just imagine having one who is completely obedient to you. A powerful spellcaster who can live long enough to serve you and even your family for generations. What a precious treasure that would be. With the little zombie around, a gray skeleton like Ainge was relatively worthless. The necromancer made a move on Ainge first, planning to subdue Ainge and then snatch the little zombie. He knew that Ainge would be so fast, causing him to lose control in a single strike. Theoretically, a broken scythe shouldn't be able, in one slice, to chop off the head of a human skin zombie. What could have caused this to happen? The necromancer, completely baffled, couldn't contain his curiosity. He sent out another skeleton. But this time, he no longer expected to be able to subdue Ainge and take the little zombie. He would be satisfied just to figure out